It's finally here. The movie that some people have been waiting years for. The version of Justice League that audiences who were fans of Batman vs. Superman and Man of Steel have been demanding nonstop on the internet. The Zack Snyder 4-hour version of Justice League. The version that we were definitely always deserving of seeing on the big screen, even though there's no way a 4-hour movie would have made the big screen. Now, before I really delve into this movie, I'm going to start this video off in a way that a lot of you are not going to expect me to. And that is by talking about the positives of the Snyder Cut, the version released to HBO Max. And probably the most positive thing I can say about this movie is that it actually exists. This cut, which was demanded from the audience, was released by a major motion picture studio, and it was upped and amped by $70 million in additional funding. This is something that absolutely never happens ever. Studios usually tell you that the version that you get is the version that you get, and you should just suck it up. Maybe you get a director's cut, but in no way, shape, or form do you get a movie that basically has half the budget of a major budget movie added into it just to be released to the fans to make up for what the studio is basically acknowledging was a mistake in the first place. To all the people out there who campaigned for this movie, who desperately wanted to see it, who essentially willed this into existence, congratulations. You actually deserve this movie, and I'm glad for you if you're really invested in Snyder's vision of DC that you got what you wanted. And I think that people who liked Man of Steel and people who like Batman vs. Superman will largely have no complaints with this movie, or very few complaints with this movie, because this is much more of a sequel to Batman vs. Superman than the version that was released previously. Now, a lot of people call the theatrical version that was released years ago the Joss Whedon cut, and a lot of hatred has been spewed in the direction of Joss Whedon for the choices that he supposedly made while making that movie. But let's be honest, that version that hit theaters was not the Joss Whedon cut. That was the theatrical cut put forward by the studio. You think Joss Whedon wanted to be capped at a 2-hour movie? Do you think it made sense for this movie, which was 4 hours of material, to be cut down to the bare bones for a 2-hour release, plus with additional scenes that the studio wanted Whedon to shoot? Do you think Joss Whedon didn't ask the studio to wait and delay the release of the movie so that the effects of the movie could at least look decent, even if the movie itself was going to be cut to its bare bones? Obviously, the director that was screwed over by the Justice League movie is Joss Whedon, and you can say Zack Snyder was also screwed over because he had a personal strategy, and Warner Brothers brought in a director that basically has a completely different style to what Zack Snyder would have portrayed on the screen. But if we're being 100% fair, Joss Whedon totally screwed over by Warner Brothers just as much as Zack Snyder, if not more so. I know that's not popular to say. I know there's a lot of hatred being spewed at Joss Whedon because a lot of stuff that has come out about how he's rude on set. But honestly, you would have to be a full denier of reality to pin this on the guy that they brought in to pinch it at the 11th hour, and then ultimately ended up going back on their word with, instead of the studio that allowed all of these events to transpire, the studio that got cold feet in the 11th hour. Now, with all that being said, let's talk about the positives about this movie that are actually in the movie. First and foremost, the story of this movie is more coherent than what we were given in the theatrical cut. Obviously, when you cut down a movie that's intended to introduce basically half of the cast that you're meeting, essentially for the first time, into a 2-hour flat movie based on nothing but the marketing team at Warner Brothers thinking a 2-hour movie would be more successful financially, you're going to have a better movie when you have more time to expand on these characters. Now, a lot of people are highlighting Cyborg as a big improvement in his portrayal in this movie versus the theatrical cut, but honestly, I think Cyborg, we're just praising him because he was barely in the theatrical cut, and this movie actually showed him. I think the two characters that benefited the most from this extended version were obviously the Flash and Aquaman, and specifically the time that we got to spend with the Flash and Aquaman together. Now, I've never been a fan of the Ezra Miller Flash. In the last movie that he was in, the theatrical cut, I found him really annoying, and I thought only a few of his jokes actually landed and worked for the movie. However, in this movie, even though his introduction action/save scene is one of the worst scenes I've ever seen in a major superhero movie and feels like it actually belongs in that other movie. I have to say, as the movie went on, I got to like him more and more because he wasn't always this, I'm gonna throw out a random joke and do my own thing and not really be involved with the team Flash. He was actually interacting with the characters and playing off the personalities, especially with the guy like Aquaman, which I think really worked and was a strength in this movie. I actually think Wonder Woman fits better in this movie than she did in the theatrical version of this movie, and the reasoning for that, I think, is because since every DC movie is essentially a reaction to a previous DC movie, and the reshoots for Justice League came out after the positive reviews for Wonder Woman, it seemed like they were trying to force Wonder Woman more into a center role than she was originally intended. Now, don't get me wrong, Wonder Woman is a central character in this movie, but it seemed like in the theatrical version, they were centering her at the expense of the other characters. And I think that paring it back a little bit, but still having her be essentially the second lead of this film, definitely worked a lot better than everybody saying Wonder Woman should be the next Superman, and Batman deferring to her and her getting all this glory, when in reality she deserves the glory, but honestly it was just a little bit too much and a little bit too little of the other characters in the previous movies. Also, her interactions with some characters, like Aquaman in a few scenes, definitely worked. She also had some scenes that were a little bit awkward, but we're in positive territory, so I'm going to stick with the positives here. Now, the next thing that is also a positive about this movie is that the emphasis of teamwork, even though it wasn't stated as ham-fisted as it was in the theatrical cut, actually comes through, and you realize that they are much better as a team than they are as individuals. In the theatrical cut, they were talking a lot about teamwork, but if you remember in the final big action sequence, the Flash was away from the action, Cyborg was just doing that separate the mother boxes thing, and basically they were waiting for Superman, not to be confused with that education movie, to come in and obliterate the bad guy because Superman didn't really need a Justice League in that movie. In this movie, you feel like even with Superman, he is a component of the team. He's a much stronger component to that team and a much more crucial component to the team, but it's still about the team more than the individual. And I think that the film honestly benefited from that because team movies shouldn't feel like you only need one member of the team. Also, Batman was better, although he was lighter in terms of tone than he was in Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. He wasn't trying to be Tony Stark in this movie, and I think that made him as a character work a little better. Not my favorite Batman interpretation, but better than what we got in the theatrical release, where he's basically a combination of Tony Stark and Nick Fury, but also borderline inept in all of his actions and plans. In this movie, he seems much more useful, which is a good thing because he's Batman. The movie is also, on a technical level, a better film. We are not staring at a bunch of unfinished CGI while we're watching this movie. Steppenwolf has been upgraded from PlayStation 2 CGI all the way up to PlayStation 3 CGI. Honestly, I don't see the appeal in this character in either version, but he is objectively better looking and more menacing in the Snyder version of this film because the effects are actually finished in the Snyder version of the film. I still think they would have benefited from, using a humanoid because Steppenwolf is typically a humanoid rather than bad CG, but in terms of bad CG, this is actually finished, not very good CG, as opposed to terrible unfinished CG. Also, the weird face thing with Henry Cavill is no more. I know a lot of people, for some reason, pin that also on Joss Whedon, as if Joss Whedon is Warner Brothers not being smart enough and not having the foresight enough to schedule all these actors for potential reshoot time like Marvel does in case they need to fix something before release. So that's gone, so you're going to look at Henry Cavill's normal face, and obviously that's way better than that creepy CGI face. Also, and this really isn't a positive, but it's also not a negative, it's about the 4x3 thing. Initially, when I saw it, I was annoyed by this. I was like, what kind of pretentious nonsense is this? I have a widescreen TV, I want to watch this movie with the full power of my television. But honestly, being perfectly fair to the movie, after a while, even though it was 4x3, my eyes adjusted and I got into it. I know people will say it's made for IMAX and all that, but you have to understand that this movie was never going to be released for IMAX. It's clearly being released for the TV, so I would have preferred it the other way. but I don't think that this was something that bothered me, and I don't think this is something that will bother you once you get past maybe like the first 3 or 4 minutes of the movie. Now that we got all the positives out of the way, I've given you the good things if you're in the camp of liking the previous movies in the DC universe. Let's get to the things that didn't work for me, because I'm somebody who didn't enjoy Batman vs. Superman and didn't enjoy Man of Steel. So my problems with the DC universe weren't problems with them changing directors 90% of the way through the production of Justice League. My problems were with the underlying storyline and the underlying setup in the DC universe, as I laid out in my Amazing Superman video that not enough of you guys actually watched. So if you're thinking that this movie is going to fix any of those things, that's just not the case. It's not going to happen. This movie is going to have all the Snyderisms and all the flaws, ultimately to the maximum because it's 4 hours long, that you expected and you got used to watching these other movies. The amount of slow-mo in this movie is absurd. It's like a parody of Zack Snyder, the level that it's being used throughout this film, and I don't understand why. Slow-mo is not cool. Like, it was interesting in 300 when we hadn't really gotten used to it, but like everything gets slow-moed, or way more things get slow-moed than usual or necessary in this movie. There's actually a scene where some guy is driving a truck and he runs a red light because he drops his hamburger, and the hamburger drop gets slow-moed, and the sesame seed falling off of the hamburger gets slow-moed. And then the flashes in that scene, by the way, spoilers for this scene in the movie, this is like his introduction to super speed seed. So he moves in super slow motion to avert the accident that's coming. Also, this really does play more like a music video than a scene in a movie. I think I've heard some other people point this out, that this movie has a bunch of music videos in this, but it's true. This is not really an action sequence. It's like a very show-offy music video, and there is music playing while this is happening. Like glory shot that's not interesting to watch, it's not entertaining, and there's a gag in this scene that's not very good. In fact, this is the scene where they had a joke where I was like, oh no, the Barry Allen that I didn't like in the other movie is from Zack Snyder's version, and we didn't actually cut a lot of that stuff out of that movie, which isn't really true, but it gives you a slice of how it's not that different, or how it could have not been interpreted to be that different based on this introduction scene to Barry Allen. Also, while I understand the need for length in this movie because they didn't bother taking the time to set up any of these characters, that doesn't mean that this movie needed to be 4 hours long, or in reality, 3.5 hours long, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this review. So clearly the 2-hour cap imposed on Joss Whedon by Warner Brothers didn't make any sense at all, because this movie introduces and sets up so many characters on the hero and the villain side that you're going to need a little bit more length than your average superhero movie in order for you to understand what's happening. I don't agree with it. I think you take the time to set it up. You have discipline. You have a plan to set up these characters beforehand. But if you're going to try to do it all in one movie, then I understand lengthening the movie. So I'm actually not too against the length in this movie, except in the parts where they definitely could have cut. Because 4 hours is ridiculously long. And I don't care how much you like Zack Snyder. I don't care how much you say you like long movies. If you look at this with even the slightest critical eye, you can definitely shave off 45 minutes from this movie. And not even counting the epilogue at the end of the movie. Yes, there's an epilogue, which is completely superfluous and doesn't matter, but that's there for the fans. You could probably shave off a good hour 15 in this movie. If this was 2 hours and 45 minutes, then this movie might actually be legit. I'd still disagree with some of the choices that Snyder made, but it would be much more efficient, much more fast-paced, and much more entertaining to watch. There's a scene where Batman goes to recruit Aquaman very early on in the movie. It's like maybe 10, 15 minutes in. Maybe it's like 6 minutes in. Honestly, I don't know. I kept pausing this movie and taking breaks because this is the kind of movie where you need to take breaks, where Aquaman says no, just like he does in the Whedon cut, and then he swims away. But then the Icelandic people start singing a hymn to Aquaman. And it's not like they sing, a couple of verses, like a couple lines, and then they cut to the next scene. they sing damn near the whole song. And again, if your movie is 4 hours long, you need to cut nonsense like this out of the movie. It's just padding. There's also scenes in this movie where you see characters taking long strolls to get to locations. I got news for Zack Snyder. There's a reason we don't typically in movies see characters literally walking from location to location or driving from location to location. That's boring, and it's not the most efficient way to communicate that information. If you see a character get into a car and then the next shot is them arriving at the location, your brain is smart enough to think, oh, they made it to that location. So if you see characters walking a direction, you don't need to see them take like 10, 15, 20, 30 steps before you get the idea that they are walking to a new location. Like, that's not how filmmaking works. I don't know why this is in the movie. It's completely overlong, and it really kills the pacing of the movie in certain portions of it. Also, there's another scene that just takes forever, and I know that this movie is meant to be viewed as if the other movie doesn't exist, but it's even more painful when you know the other movie exists and you know essentially what scene is coming. Like, after the Amazons are attacked by Steppenwolf and he gets the first mother box, the Amazons try to deliver a message to Diana about the attack that happened on them. So the Amazons go into this area on their Amazon island. They grab an arrow. They explain that the arrow is from the messenger god that I forgot the name in Greek lore. They say that the arrow will burn bright and Diana will definitely find it. They take their time to light up the arrow. They take their time to draw the arrow. They shoot the arrow over into wherever Diana is. She might be in England or Paris or whatever. It honestly does not matter. The arrow sets on fire. Then there's a news report about the fire. Then Diana sees the news report. Then Diana goes out to the location where the arrow is. Then Diana picks up the arrow. And there's a message on the arrow. And instead of this message, communicating the information to Diana, she ends up having to take the arrow through this little maze thing into this little tunnel and use the arrow as a key to go into a room. And then she sees a bunch of like hieroglyphics and all the stuff that sets up for Darkseid. And then we see her explain to Bruce Wayne all the stuff related to Darkseid and that past scene where, the Apocalypse people tried to invade Earth and the Green Lantern, the Greek gods, the humans, and the Atlanteans all teamed up to fight to get the mother boxes separated and send Darkseid back. In this movie, it's Darkseid, not Steppenwolf, that try to invade Earth. But my point is that it's not efficient to tell the story in that way, and that took way too long. And you see Diana walking down these stairs and all this stuff happening. It was even boring me saying it. I'm sure none of you enjoyed listening to it, because that stuff could have been cut down significantly. There are a ton of scenes in this movie that just desperately need to be cut down. I'm telling you, a 2 hour and 45 minute version of this movie, not counting the epilogues, would definitely work a lot better than this 4 hour monstrosity that we ended up getting. Because there's multiple scenes where the movie just stops to explain stuff to you, and I understand that they have to explain stuff to you, but considering the other explanations kind of covered similar territory, the explanations that they do later in the movie significantly need to be cut down. Like, after Wonder Woman does all that stuff that I described to get the information on the mother boxes, later in the movie, Victor Stone, Cyborg, gives you an origin of a single mother box, which, by the way, is very similar to the origin of the Tesseract or the chain of custody in the Tesseract in the Avengers movies, in that the old humans that kind of look like Vikings had possession of it, and then they buried it somewhere, and then the Nazis found it during World War II, but then the Americans took it for the Nazis before the Nazis could use it to make a weapon, and they had just been holding on to it, and then all of a sudden, when some alien invasion weird stuff happens, they got some scientists to experiment with it as a potential way to fight off future alien invasions. It's basically the exact same story of the Tesseract and what its purpose is in the first Avengers, and considering there are 3 of these mother boxes that, when they're united, act even more powerfully than one as an individual in order to free Darkseid, who's the guy that Marvel Comics ripped off the idea for Thanos for, it's really, really on the nose a copy of what we saw in the Avengers movies. I understand that these things in DC in the comics predate the Avengers movies, But if you're going to go through all that, maybe cut out the stuff that's a direct ripoff of what we saw in the other movie. We don't need that, especially since half of that exposition scene was telling us about Cyborg, information that we partially learned about Cyborg earlier in the movie. So it's essentially a duplicate scene, and I can't stand duplicate scenes in movies that communicate the same information to you, especially in a 4-hour movie where you're wasting time. Just get to the point already. They revealed that Darkseid is like the villain or the potential villain behind the villain early on in the movie, and I appreciate that. But they revealed that the thing that Darkseid is looking for, the new MacGuffin that's not the mother boxes, the anti-life equation, which again I know is dated back in Darkseid's history, he always talks about it, blah blah blah, I'm not saying it's new in that sense, is also on Earth at like the 2-hour and 10-minute mark. So at the midpoint in the movie, when the whole movie's about these MacGuffins, the mother boxes, we hear about the other MacGuffin that Darkseid's interested in. There's also some really bad and really misplaced fan service in this movie, and one of the places that Zack Snyder decided to insert a fan service moment is unintentionally one of the most hilarious scenes in cinema history. And I'm gonna go into spoilers starting right now, like serious spoilers about things that happen, with this point, because honestly, this is probably the funniest scene in the movie, and it was not intended to be. Because in this scene, you have Lois Lane, who is as boring and bland as ever. She's probably the worst version of Lois Lane, because now she's actually trying to be depressed instead of being the mopey, depressed, miserable character that she was in the previous movies, and it's definitely working. I'm definitely not interested in anything she's selling, and she's sitting with Martha Kent, Superman's mom, who, as we discussed in my Superman video, is also not my favorite character. And they're having this very intimate conversation about how they both love Clark and about how they're the only ones who knew Clark Kent, not just Superman, so they feel even more strongly and nobody else can understand their pain. And the conversation is actually, a little bit of a nice moment if I cared about either of these characters, if they were developed well, if they were developed more than Superman's weird mom who's not a very good parent, and Superman's girlfriend who likes him for some reason. This might have had a more of an impact. But then Martha Kent leaves, and her eyes turn red, and she shifts into the Martian Manhunter. Which I love the Martian Manhunter. He's somebody that I wish was included in a Justice League movie in a significant way, but I don't think I love the Martian Manhunter shape-shifting into Martha Kent to have an intimate, personal conversation with Lois Lane about how she loved her son and she could connect with her on how much she loved Clark because the Martian Manhunter is Clark's mother, or pretending to be Clark's mother. It's the weirdest choice I've ever seen in a movie, and it's absolutely hilarious. I love it in every way because it's so bad. Also, the plot is the same as the theatrical version of the movie. You put the boxes together, it terraforms the planet. I don't know why DC is so obsessed with terraforming planet Earth. Zod wanted to terraform planet Earth because he didn't want the powers of godly Kryptonians. All of a sudden in the other movie you gotta terraform planet Earth, and in this movie you gotta terraform planet Earth to make it look more like Apocalypse. Like, stop terraforming the planet, just conquer the planet as is, or, do something else more interesting. And although Steppenwolf does look better as a villain, like the CG is improved, I am acknowledging that, he's not really that much better as a villain. Like, there's not that much more depth added to him. He's still, I'm going to destroy you, I serve my Dark Master on another planet, I am the bad guy, I want to beat you guys up because I'm more powerful, I want to conquer this world, blah 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 blah. And although I love Darkseid, and I really wanted to see for a long time Darkseid as a villain in one of these DC movies, he's the exact same way. I want to destroy things, all these worlds have fallen, hundreds of thousands of worlds have fallen to me, Darkseid, because I destroyed things, because I'm the bad guy, and that's what the bad guy does. My name's Darkseid. After Thanos' plan and how much of a character Thanos actually was in the Infinity War movie, this is just disappointing and not good enough, especially when so many DC villains and so many Marvel villains and so many villains overall are this generic, bland, I'm going to do bad things and say I'm powerful and whatnot. It's just not interesting, and they could have done better. Again, you have 4 hours, maybe some character development. Now, I have to say, when I was watching this movie, I had a little bit of hope, because you have the scene, which was my favorite scene in the previous movie, where Superman is fighting the Justice League, and Wonder Woman goes to do that, like, bracelet thing that she does. It's like her only move in the movie. Like, it was cool once, but they use it way too many times in all these movies. And Superman, like, blitzes her and grabs him, stops her. It's really cool. Then he headbutts her into the ground. Best scene in either cut of the movie. And I was hopeful that eventually, like in the other movie, Superman would come back as, like, a more Superman-like character. And in this movie, it seemed like they were going in that direction. I mean, he's wearing the black suit, which is really cheesy and over the top. Every hack writer wants to put Superman in the black suit because the Superman suit is just not cool enough. It's not edgy enough. But he seemed more hopeful. He seemed more optimistic. He seemed like a better person. And when he goes to fight Steppenwolf, like, you know, he's working with people, he's doing his thing and all that. And then Steppenwolf is, like, effectively defeated and Superman has him pinned down. And you're watching, like, the resolution of the movie, and you just see in the background Superman, like, viciously beating Steppenwolf and, like, heat visioning him. Like, he cuts off that, like, horn side of his head, and he's essentially torturing this man, or this alien, with his heat vision. And I'm like, oh, yeah, we're still dealing with, not Superman. We're still doing he's kind of edgy, he's kind of dark, violent for no reason, extra violent on top of that, using way more force than is necessary. That's still the version of the character that we're getting. Again, it's more true to what we saw in the previous movies, but considering they talk about him like he's the hero that he should be, it's kind of embarrassing to watch this unfold on the big screen again. And I'm going to get back to Superman because it's going to get worse, but I also want to talk about unnecessary force in an earlier scene, which was the bank robbery scene. Now, to be honest, when I first saw this scene, I laughed, because what else can I do but laugh? Wonder Woman breaks up the bank robbery. It's very similar to her breaking up the bank robbery in the previous movie, where, you know, she dodged blah bracelet, all the machine gun fire and all that. And then the bad guy goes to, like, reload, and instead of blitzing him and taking the gun out of his hand and, you know, hurting him because he was trying to kill a bunch of children, Wonder Woman does that, like, sonic clank thing and obliterates every molecule of this person. In front of, like, 100 children, this is what Wonder Woman does. And then one of the girls is like, Wonder Woman! That's how the girl sounds, 100%. I'm, like, amazing at my line reading. Can I be like you one day? And Wonder Woman says to her, because she's a girl, you can be whatever you want to be. I mean, I'm half God and half Amazon, so you definitely actually can't be like me. But since you're a girl, you can do anything. And people are complaining that this inspirational, aka cheesy scene was taken out of the movie. But remember, Wonder Woman just obliterated, like, she nuked this guy out of existence. Totally unnecessary in front of this kid. And then the kid still wants to be like her. Like, the kid's not horrified at what she just did to this person. It's just acceptable. Wonder Woman, just like all the DC heroes, use unnecessary force, and they kill without remorse. And I know people are going to say Wonder Woman doesn't have a no-kill rule, blah, 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 blah. And I'm not saying that Wonder Woman doesn't kill her opponents, but this was a murder. She didn't have to do this. It wasn't a self-defense scenario. She had a million other ways with her power set that are just shown to us in that scene. So she just decides to murder him, to obliterate him out of existence because she feels like it. Not because she needed to, not because she was pushed to her limits, but because she had the power to do so, so why not murder your foes just for the sake of it? But back to the ending of the movie. You get your hero shot at the end of the movie, about 3.5 hours into the movie, and it seems like everything's a wrap. And then all of a sudden, a title card appears. And if you don't know, there's a bunch of title cards throughout this movie that are like part 1, cringy line, or whatever. And this one says epilogue. And the remaining 30 minutes of this movie is like Zack Snyder pitching ideas for the remainder of the DC universe. But to understand one of these ideas, we actually have to go back, and I know I'm jumping around a whole bunch of times, but don't worry, it's definitely worth it. Because earlier in the movie, when Lois Lane is visiting Superman's grave every single day, which somehow they managed to turn into a slow motion, sad, video music tribute with the sad song in the background, Lois Lane opens her drawer and she sees a pregnancy test. Because, of course, Lois Lane, pregnant maybe? Oh my god. And then later in the movie, when Bruce Wayne is sitting in his chair, he looks over at the Flash and he's like, I remember Barry Allen coming from a portal in a dream and telling me Lois is the key. To which Wonder Woman responds, Lois is the key. Superman loves Lois Lane. And Batman's like, but it seemed like it was more than that. And it was at this point in the movie, pregnancy test plus this, that I had basically confirmed my suspicions that we were going into the direction of Injustice, the evil Superman after Lois Lane is killed when she's pregnant. And in that video game, she was killed by the Joker, but it's heavily implied and basically almost confirmed with a still image that she's killed by Darkseid. But the thing is, Superman responds to that by joining Darkseid. Now, I've had a bunch of DC nerds tell me, well, he doesn't really join him. He just gets mind controlled by him and then becomes the villain. And if you guys are not sure where this is going, at one of these pitches for Zack Snyder's idea, it's basically Injustice. It's that desert scene with Batman, with the guns, and he's teamed up with a bunch of villains and some heroes, and Superman is the villain, which is the cringiest, most embarrassing thing I could have possibly imagined. So of course it's in this movie. The hackiest thing that you can do is make Superman the villain, and of course, this is completely undercut because the premise of Injustice, of Superman turning the villain, is not just Lois Lane dying, it's Lois Lane dying at the hands of the Joker, and Superman killing the Joker for revenge. He snaps, he murders another living thing, and this divides up the Justice League and divides up the whole world on whether or not what Superman did was justified. And once Superman gets a taste for killing, he continues killing. He continues ruling with an iron fist, and he takes over. But that doesn't really work because remember, in Man of Steel, Superman killed as his first option with Zod. His very first day on the job, he snapped his opponent's necks. So therefore, who cares if he kills the Joker? Which is why in this movie, he doesn't kill the Joker, and why it's implied that maybe he's being mind controlled. So Superman, the man of tomorrow, Earth's greatest hero, somebody who's been in comics for, since 1938, this amazing figure, pillar of virtue, all that, is basically a slave in Zack Snyder's future vision from the Snyderverse. And I'm supposed to be into that. I'm supposed to be interested in that. All these stories end up in this direction. They're like, what if Superman was a villain? It's like, but you need a light Superman before you turn him dark. If he's always dark, always moody, always doesn't care about humanity, hence all the destruction in Man of Steel, then this turn doesn't work. Also, Batman ends up having a conversation, a lot of people are hyping it, with the Joker in this movie, where they use the F word a bunch of times and there's some clunky dialogue. And it's the most edgelordy, cringy stuff I've ever seen, but it's also incredibly confusing because for some reason, the Joker is alive. And I don't understand why the Joker is alive, because he should obviously be dead, because as we saw in Batman vs. Superman, Batman kills people. And if Batman's going to kill random henchmen in that movie, why wouldn't he kill the Joker, who it's confirmed killed Robin in this movie? The Joker's a way bigger threat than the guys Lex Luthor paid for security that Batman had no problem killing, but the Joker still exists. You see, this is what we call a contradiction in a story, something that doesn't make sense. If Batman actually had his no-killing rule, which Zack Snyder thinks is stupid, then this would make perfect sense because Batman doesn't kill people, but since Batman kills people who aren't even remotely as bad as the Joker, this is a contradiction that he's alive. Again, that's the bed that Zack Snyder made. I'm just pointing it out. But hey, consistency, story structure, plot, characters, that's all irrelevant. Did you see these zooms? Did you see these visuals? Do you feel edgy watching this rated R movie that doesn't need to be rated R and has a bunch of bad CGI blood in order to pump it up to a rated R movie? Also, the Injustice storyline, the Justice Lord storyline from the animated series, the reason those work is because this isn't the main timeline. These are usually alternate timelines where the real Superman, the real Batman, the real heroes from the real planet Earth actually go over and eventually end up defeating them. In this universe, this is the timeline. Zack Snyder, who hates Superman, who said repeatedly that his purpose is to deconstruct the character because he thinks it's immature that we would look up to somebody that doesn't have any flaws, even though Superman does have flaws. You just have to be an intelligent writer to write stories that actually challenge the character and not cop out by saying, actually, he's miserable just like the rest of us. He's not a good guy. He has just as many vices, he throws just as many tantrums, and he's just as big a baby as I am, the creator behind this. He's not that great. Let me take him down a peg because I don't like that the man of tomorrow reflects poorly on who I am today, so I'm gonna take down that person. Now, maybe this peek into the future could have actually worked had it been set up properly in the previous movies. Had Superman actually been built up as the hero that he is supposed to be, and not this whiny, narcissistic person who doesn't really care about humanity, who doesn't care about preserving human life, who murders his first villain on his first day out, who lets his father die via tornado in order to keep his secret, then maybe this could have worked because we could have saw that glimpse into the future and thought to ourselves, what could have led the hero that we're watching throughout all of these movies to get to that endpoint? That would have created intrigue, that would have created interest for what we had to look forward to. But this was obviously the conclusion for Superman. He's borderline a villain throughout the previous movies. He definitely causes more damage than any other villain we've seen in the DC Pantheon. So why should we be surprised that somebody this angry, somebody this disinterested, somebody this nihilistic ends up becoming a murderous villain? He's already kind of a murderous villain. This is not impressive. This is not clever. This is not highbrow. This is not intelligent. This is like as if a 14-year-old was writing this after just playing Injustice, Gods Among Us, or whatever the Mortal Kombat version of DC is called, if I got the title wrong. I think I got it right, but who cares? It's the hackiest thing that you could possibly do to make Superman the villain, and that's how this movie ends, and that's how I'll remember the Zack Snyder universe. The hackiest choices over and over again, with a bunch of bad slow-mos and a bunch of bad CGI that's completely overused. So yes, is this movie better than the one that was released previously that obviously had the fingerprints of the studio all over it? 100%. Is this movie good? Is this movie compelling and interesting? Is this movie appealing? Does this movie make up for the mistakes in the underlying foundations of the DCEU from previous movies? Absolutely not. If you don't like Batman vs. Superman, if you didn't care for Man of Steel, you won't like this movie. If you're somebody who thinks the Zack Snyder universe is super awesome and you like overlong, pretentious movies, then you'll absolutely love this. Anyway, those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you liked the video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me via the support links in the description box. This has been me talking for the last time, hopefully, about the DCEU. Till next time.